sometimes when you're factoring quadratics, you get a situation where the quadratic is actually a difference of two squares. So in the first example here, x squared minus 16, x squared, that's a perfect square, and 16 is also a perfect square. It's 4 squared. So when that's the case, you could do this problem a couple ways, but one way is to factor it by using the difference of two squares. And you can know that every single time when you do this, it's going to be the square root of x squared, or x, minus the square root of 16, which is 4, times the same exact thing with a plus sign. Now, it's not really magic. If you really thought about it for a while and tried to figure it out, you could look at this as x squared plus 0x minus 16. And it would make sense then that x times x gets me the x squared. What are two things that multiply to negative 16? Well, in order to multiply to a negative, one has to be positive and one has to be negative, so that takes care of that. And there's a few options for what I can choose to multiply to 16, but if we want this middle term to be 0, then when I add these, they're going to have to be exact opposites, minus 4 and plus 4. So that's what helps us choose those. And you can think of it that way if you'd like, or you can just see this problem and remember, oh, difference of two squares, and be able to factor it pretty quickly. So on this problem, once you do factor it as difference of two squares, now you need to look at it and say, hey, I have two things multiplied, which equals 0. That's the whole reason we factored this. If two things are multiplied to equal 0, one of them has to be 0. So either x minus 4 is equal to 0, or x plus 4 equals 0. And if I add 4 to both sides, I get x equals 4. And if I subtract 4 from both sides on this one, I get negative 4. And so my solution is x equals 4 or negative 4. Okay, so that's a pretty simple one. And then over on the right, we have one that looks a little bit more complicated. It's still a difference of two squares. 4x squared is a perfect square. It's 2x all squared. And 1 is a perfect square. It's 1 squared. So if I was going to factor this, I would factor it as 2x plus 1 times 2x minus 1. This 1 is the square root of 1, and 2x is the square root of this 4x squared. You can see 2x times 2x is 4x squared. Also, if you multiply there, you get minus 2x. Multiply here, you get plus 2x, so you can see that's where that middle term, that 0x in the middle here, that isn't there, that's why that goes away. And then right here we have 1 times negative 1, or this minus 1, and we have 2x times 2x, which gets us that 4x squared. So it does factor to that. Okay, so now we just need to look at this and say, hey, we have a product here. These two things are multiplied to 0. The only way that can happen is if one of them is 0. So I'm going to say either 2x plus 1 equals 0 or 2x minus 1 equals 0. Okay, solving this, I would subtract 1 from both sides. 2x equals negative 1, divide by 2, and x equals negative 1/2. We do the same thing over here on the right, but we would add 1 and divide by 2. And x equals positive 1/2. So my two solutions are negative 1/2 and 1/2. And that's how you factor to solve quadratic equations by the difference of two squares.